Hello, this is Mrs. Anderson, and today we're going to look at the poem The Second Coming. So, this is what I call a quick analysis of what can be a really dark poem. So, we're going to be exploring the poem The Second Coming by William Butler Yeats, and I think it's important to know a little bit about the poet before we begin. So, just like you do your World Poet presentations and have to tell me where this poet is from and what may have influenced him, here's what we need to know about Yeats. He was an Irishman, and he was attracted to the spiritual and the occult world and fashioned for himself an elaborate mythology to explain the human experience. He believed that history moved in 2,000-year cycles. So when he wrote this poem in 1919, he believed that in a mere 79 years, that cycle would be coming to an end, and perhaps it was an ominous end to this cycle. You have to remember that the Second Coming was written after the catastrophe of World War I. And this war was supposed to be the war to end all wars, but many looked around and saw the beginnings of things like communism and fascism and felt threatened by that. So, as we analyze this poem today, what I want you to consider is why Achebe would have chosen a line from this poem as the title of his book. So, this is a photograph taken from the front dedications of your book. You may not have noticed before, but this title, Things Fall Apart, why it seems very representative of what happened to the Igbo tribe, it was actually a borrowed term from Yeats's poem. This is from the first stanza, and if you look at the first line, it clearly says, things fall apart, the center cannot hold. So let's take a closer look at the poem. What we're going to do first is go ahead and listen to a recitation of this.
The Second Coming by W.B Yeats. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The centre cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly are those words out, when a vast image out of spiritus mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born.
So let's look at that first stanza. Notice that the poem begins with a speaker talking about a gyre. If you're not familiar with what a gyre is, it's a spiral, a large spiral whirlpool-like shape. And as you see this spire, notice that he's talking about a number of situations that are quite unpleasant. To begin with, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Falcons are often used for hunting, and the falconer is the individual that controls the falcon and has it return with whatever it has hunted that day. But notice in this case, the bird of prey is out at large and cannot be controlled anymore by the person in charge. And as the speaker talks about things falling apart and the center of that gyre kind of, dissipating and not being able to hold anymore, he discusses a situation that seems like it's getting even worse. There's anarchy in the world. He talks about the tide being dimmed with blood. The ceremony of innocence is drowned. So we know baptism is supposed to be this rebirth, but if that ceremony is drowned and not used anymore, it tells you how that's going. And then the scary part are the last two lines, that the best people in this particular point in time lack all conviction. Conviction being morality or how to behave correctly in society. While he says the worst people are passionate about their lack of conviction or their intensity towards that. So he paints a picture of a really bleak world. And unfortunately, in the second stanza, I'm not sure if it's getting any better. So he admits in the second stanza that there has to be some revelation. And what he makes a reference to is something called the second coming. So within the Bible, in the book of Revelations, one of the things that's discussed is that Jesus will return again. That will be his second return or his second coming to earth. So when he talks about the second coming, there might be this spark of hope. But notice, just as he says those words, he looks out into the world and something troubles him. He talks about in the sands of the desert, he notices a shape. Notice it's a lion body and the head of a man. Now, if you remember from our study of kind of primitive cultures, he sees a sphinx-like creature. And notice that its gaze is blank and it has no pity. And it's moving very slowly while these desert birds, usually birds that feed on carrion, are surrounding it. So that's not a very happy picture. Now, as it gets darker as this creature approaches, he does acknowledge that this creature has been asleep now for 20 centuries. Why 20 centuries? Well, remember at this point in time, that 2,000-year cycle is coming to an end. So this creature has been asleep for 2,000 years. Well, what happened 2,000 years ago? Notice that he alludes to a rocking cradle that can be found in Bethlehem. So Jesus, for the last 2,000 years, has set the world on a particular course, and now this creature, which has been sleeping during this time, is returning to Bethlehem, and it looks like this rough beast is going to unleash some difficult situations on the entire world. So, what do we have to think about here? So, think of the fact that the speaker creates a sphinx beast. This is a symbol of antiquity. It's a symbol of a polytheistic society. And notice that it's coming to the modern world, to the side of Bethlehem, almost symbolizing that it's there to destroy Christianity. That when the world comes to an end at the end of this 2,000-year cycle, there's going to be somebody else in charge. So this is the second coming that Yeats is referring to in his poem, this transition from this world of modernity to this world of antiquity, from monotheism to possibly polytheism. So what you need to ask is, why did Achebe pick this as the title? Is this really the message that he is sending, or is he presenting an opposing view? Remember that Achebe was educated in England. He would have been very familiar with Irish literature, and he would have been familiar with Yeats. So as someone who wrote this book in the English language for an English audience, is there a possibility that he could be ironic about this title as he uses it in his book? So that's something I'm going to ask you to think about now.